Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is James from AppTech. I will just give folks a few more minutes to join here, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right. Well, I have 2 o'clock here on my clock, so we'll go ahead and get started with today's session. Hopefully, the audio is working okay, and everyone can see my screen displayed here of the various PVNG reports. So, as I mentioned in the invite for this call, the topic for today is going to be going through the report writing process within PVNG. So, as a reminder, these PVNG Tooltip webinars are going to be a monthly series where we're going to pick a topic and try to highlight that for our various users. Today's topic is a bit unique just because it's a little more in-depth than some of the other ones that we focused on. So I did allow a little more time for today's session. But I always like to mention on these calls, if there's anything that you think would be valuable to overview during these calls, please let myself or Kim know, and we'll be happy to take a look at covering that. I know we've hit on a couple of the different modules and different features here throughout this series. But the goal is to typically keep these shorter in nature, around 10 to 15 minutes. Like I said, today's might go a little over that. I've set it for a half hour. We'll see how much time we really need here. But yeah, with that being said, I don't have really a PowerPoint to go through today. There's not much to show from that standpoint. Figured we'd just go ahead and jump into the demo. So everyone's probably pretty familiar with at least running different financial reports at a PVNG, depending upon your access and what you do within the system. I think most of us have been within our GL section here. We've gone through, we're familiar with running some reports. In fact, I think we covered just running reports and some of those trend reports in a previous Tooltips webinar series. But the question for today, or the topic for today, is how do these actually get created? What goes into these reports, and how do we construct these? So I already ran a summary operating statement. This is going to be the sort of the premise of what we'll go through here today. And I'll get into some more of the details here momentarily. But I just want to use this as our sort of baseline as I reference certain items and I go through the layout of columns and rows and calculations and things like that. This is going to be what I'll probably use for the most part. Before we get into all of this, I do want to preface with this functionality with report writing. And as I was talking with the support team prior to this, they did bring to my attention, this is really more of an administrative level function. So some of the folks on the call today may not have access to be able to do this. Some might be able to. And at the end of the day, when it comes to creating content and creating reports, AppTech's probably going to be the best resource to be able to do some of this for you, depending upon the complexity. But I want to make everyone aware that there is an advanced report writing tool in here. And like I said, I'm not going to get into every little detail, but I just want to show you sort of how the sausage is made here and what goes into creating this content. So with that being said, let's go ahead and touch on that. So I'm going to be referencing back and forth between the summary operating statement here and then what's actually within the system setup portion of the financial reports. So everything is going to be driven off of the report setup here. So when I drill into my financial reports, I'm going to have a layout here of basically every single report that I have built in the system. So if I toggle back over to my GL, when I go into my financials, all of these that are listed here are going to be the ones displayed here within my financial reports. So all that should line up. Like I said, I want to focus on the summary operating statement here. And when I drill into this, I'll show you what those components are, but you get a bit of a sense here on within each report, a description of what it's showing, what's within those columns and what is within those rows. So you're going to see or hear a lot about the different columns, rows, as well as the formulas. And that's really the backbone of how you build a report. So you kind of start from the base and build out those different components to finally create this financial report. So when I click into my summary operating statement, just a couple of things to touch on here. One being just a basic description whenever you're creating a new report. Next being, what is this type of report? So your basic types of report are going to be profit and loss, balance sheet, as well as cash flow. Down here is where you're going to designate the row and column layouts that are going to be utilized. Now, there's a lot of these that are already built that I'll touch on when we get into the actual rows and columns over here. So all of these options that I'm going to show you are all driven off of these two areas within the administrative setup. So the first big thing is going to be designating what row format or what layout am I utilizing, and then what's going to be within those columns. To me, at least, the columns are a little bit more straightforward. So I'm going to start there as we go through this. But before we get into those rows and columns, one thing to really keep in mind with these reports is when you're looking at these, it's never a good practice to delete these. When you delete a report, you're not just deleting it for that specific company that you're logged into. That will delete that across the entire portfolio. So just something to highlight, if you do have this administrative capability, we always recommend users, if you think you're not going to use something, inactivate that report. Don't actually go in and delete it because it might have some effects that you may not realize across the organization. We've had clients in the past that have done that, and it's had a bit of a ripple effect. So just a housekeeping item there. Always want to utilize the inactive checkbox there as opposed to actually deleting that. The other nice thing too is if there are going to be any zero values on these reports, you can suppress those zeros. So it just won't display that line item. If there was no data there, it's just not going to have it there. So that's what that option does. Here is just if you want to actually display the ratios or not, and then whether you want to show that % symbol within this report. From a sharing perspective, this companies tab is going to tell the system which companies do we want this report to be shared across. So all your various companies that are set up here, you're able to come in here and provide access to those through that companies tab. So that's, if I came in here and created a new one, all of these would be blank, and I'd be able to come in and actually designate those fields and what those rows and columns should look like. So let's actually start to look at some of those components. Oh, one other thing I want to touch on too is the financial packages before we get into the rows and columns. If you aren't aware, this is a nice tool that allows you to group your reports. So whether there might be a certain set of daily reports or monthly reports that we have displayed here, or if you have investor or owner reports, whatever the situation might be, if you want a group of reports to be packaged together and all run at once instead of manually checking those off, this is just a clean, tidy way to be able to organize those. And basically the way this works is you're essentially just going to come in and you'll see all your different reports displayed here. You'll give it a description. So like the other ones were daily, monthly. This could be, for your owners. And all those reports are going to be displayed. And you can basically just come in here and pick and choose which ones you want included within that package. And then if I toggle back over to GL here, within my financials, here's where those packages are displayed. And like I said, what that does for you is if I pick daily, it's going to check those off. If I were to pick monthly, it would check off those monthly reports. It's nice when you have 50, 60 of these in the system. It can start to get a little complex. Those reports those packages just allow you to categorize or organize those reports. So let's go over to the column setup here. And I want to jump back over to our summary operating statement because this is what we're going to kind of use as our baseline today. So when we look at the columns built within this report, we can see we have our current month actual with a percent total for those dollar values. We have our current month budget with, again, percent total over here, variance to budget, current month last year, and then variance to last year. Same thing over here, year-to-date actual, year-to-date budget with variance, year-to-date last year with variance, as well as those percent total columns included. So when we see that layout, when we actually drill in to see what that looks like when we're building this, what that backbone looks like, if I click into my standard P&L layout column description, and we can see the columns kind of follow the types of reports in here. So you got your, the balance sheet, P&L, cash flow. These are going to be not as ranging as some of the rows might get to be. And it does depend on how complex your reporting is. But when I click into my standard P&L here, this is now where we can actually see that layout. So we can see my first column here, just like I overviewed, was my current month actual. And this is also where I can touch on the different types of data that we have in the system. So if you're utilizing planning data, like budget for the most part, or some people might have forecast, this is where you can tell the system what type of data do I want that column to represent. I'm going to work my way down here. We have current month budget now here using plan data. Here is that variance column to budget, and that's actually calculated. So I'll drill into these details to show you kind of how those calculations take place. Then we have our current month last year, variance to last year calculated, and then over here are going to be those year-to-date roll-ups. So when we look at, let's look at current month budget using plan data. When I click into any of these columns, when you're building these, within each column is where you start to designate some of the detail. And there's a lot that can be controlled. That's going to be kind of the theme here, is there's a lot of customization that can be done. It's a really powerful tool that's sort of at your fingertips, but it can get a little complex, and it can get a little dangerous if you're not aware of what you're doing in here. But once I get into this column here, and really my main point was just to show you that when we're looking at any of these, designating that type of planning data that's in there. Right now I have budget, but that's where you can delineate that. You can tell the system exactly what text you want displayed within that particular column. And then down here is where you can control what that time frame is going to be within this particular column as well. So that's a pretty straightforward one. If we look at this variance column to show how we can come up with some of those calculations, you'll see on this variance column, same sort of thing, except now on that column type, instead of using actual data, plan data, this is going to be a calculated field. So when I input the calculated field, down here is where you can start to build out some of those calculations. We'll get into that a little bit, so on just exactly how those calculations function within some of the formulas. But here, basically, we're just utilizing our current month actual subtracted from current month budget. So when you're starting to build some of the calculations on these columns, here's where you're able to actually build out what that looks like and how that appears. So like I said, the columns to me are pretty straightforward. You get a picture here of how some of the calculated fields are input, how some of the actual data as well as plan data can be input, and then just simple things like alignment can be controlled through this, just the aesthetics on how that report looks and feels. Let's jump over to the rows portion here. So let me go over to rows. I'm going to use our summary operating statement again. So when I drill into my summary operating statement, this is going to be a little bit more detailed from a row standpoint. We can see how all of those different rows are built in, which ones are headers, which ones are calculations, which ones are subtotals, what's included in that subtotal. All of those various components are going to be built through the rows function. And this is where I'll kind of touch on some of those formulas as well. But this is a good time for me to also make a point when you're looking at your chart of accounts and we start to look at utilizing ranges and wildcards within that chart. When you do have some logic, when you're leveraging an AppTech standard chart or USALI standard chart, creating these financials becomes a lot easier because we understand that certain departments start with a certain number sequence and certain accounts go through certain ranges. So when we're categorizing those accounts in your financial reports, it just makes things a lot more straightforward and just easier to organize. So I'll jump back over to our actual report and just kind of walk through some of the rows that are built. So we have our available rooms, some of our stats up here: rooms sold, ADR, OC, RevPAR, all the different operating revenues here, my departmental expenses. All of these various line items are controlled through these rows. So we can see that some of these are header text, some of these are just giving us some information around what this report's displaying. But when we jump into some of those rows up top, the rooms available, rooms sold, ADR, that are utilizing a formula, when I click into these, this is where we can actually get pretty specific on what's being displayed, what amount is in that numerator, what's in that denominator. And then if I want to use a formula that's already built, this is where you can input that. So within this row sequence here, I'm utilizing the formula rooms available. So I talked about how you kind of build this from the ground up. If I toggle over to my formulas here, we can see 534. Within my formulas, if I search for that description, actually, let's just go with D. We can see we have that rooms available formula that's built in there, and this is where we can actually come in and build those custom formulas for each one of these. So you can have as many formulas as built that can be applied to those different rows. So let me go back over to the actual report itself. So we can see, what the rooms available, rooms sold, ADR, and occupancy percentage, all of those formulas that you're utilizing for that row type are all going to be built within that specific formula database there and then applied to these. So like I said, I'm not going to get into the actual creation of all this, because if this is something that you want some more advanced training on, it'd probably be good to do this one-on-one, but just showing you kind of how the infrastructure is built. So we'll go back over to my rows here and show you also a couple of examples of how we utilize the wildcards as well as ranges. So for here within our rooms department, if I click into this particular row, we can see we're utilizing a wildcard calculation here. And what this allows me to do, and this is going back to that chart logic, is I know that for this specific row, I know that any account starting 01, 03, all of those values behind that should fall into this. So again, using that chart logic, I'm able to utilize those wildcards to pull in those. So if you create a new account and it falls within that range or within that field, the system's going to know to automatically pull that into this particular row. When we look at one for a range, it's a similar concept here, except now I can designate an actual range of accounts that should be pulled in to build out that particular financial row there, or report row, I should say. So I have a lot of stuff in here from both a rows and column standpoint already built. But really, you get the picture here that you start to build out these rows, you start to build out these columns, as well as these formulas. And from there, we can start to actually build out the various financial reports within the system. A few other things that can be added, customized images on these reports. So if you needed to have any sort of logo or anything like that, as well as the different text variables there, all of that can get controlled and highly flexible as well. So that's the big thing that I think I want you all to get out of this, is the flexibility that's there with the different data types that can be included, as well as just within your different rows there, how the various calculations can be input, the different subtotals and ratios. All of that functionality is very detailed, as well as available there for you to utilize. The last thing to show here, just on a system report standpoint, this is a good tool to be able to utilize if you just want to see what's actually within these reports. You can't change anything utilizing these system reports, but it's good just to see what different data elements are going to be incorporated. So if I look at my financial rows here, this is going to allow me to look at any financial row to actually see the details behind what's in that, or what's the framework within that row. So these were all those rows that we just looked at. If we look at a summary operating statement and I run that, now I can kind of see what that infrastructure looks like. So each one of these rows, we can see the row type, the description of that, what accounts are included. So for my rooms, we're utilizing a wildcard. Down here, when we have any sort of ranges within F&B, we can see the ranges of those accounts that are included. If there is any sort of a calculation, so for those percent columns here, when we're looking at percent of totals for the current month actual, we can see what the percent numerator and denominator is for any of those. So this is just a good way to kind of see what that backbone or what that infrastructure looks like with that report. And again, you can't hurt anything looking at these. It's just a good idea or a good way of seeing it. The other system report that is good to utilize is going to be the financial reports by account number. So financial reports by account number allows me to search any GL account to see what's incorporated within that financial statement, or where it's incorporated within a financial statement. So I'm going to just pull my 010 retail rooms revenue. And when I run that, I can see with that GL account every single report that's been incorporated with, how it's incorporated, whether it's a wildcard range or a formula, and then the description of that actual row where that GL account has been incorporated as well. So, like I said, I figured we'd probably go a little over our typical time frame here, and the goal here wasn't to have you walk out of here being able to go build your own financial report, really giving you an idea of what's incorporated within that, how these get created, how detailed and complex it can get. That does allow us to give you that customization. If there's folks on here that are at the administrative level, or anyone at your organization that thinks, they want to get a little more into these weeds, I would have our support team set up some time separately where we can give some more one-on-one guidance to be able to help you start to create some of these. Or if you just want to ask some questions or anything along those lines, reach out to myself or Kim. We'd be happy to facilitate that. And then, as I always mention, any suggestions or any other items you'd like us to cover during these calls, please reach out and give us that feedback directly. So I thank you, everyone, for the time today, and just reach out if there's any follow-up questions or anything like that. And I look forward to our next Tooltips webinar. Thank you.